Hi everyone, and welcome back to the North Park Youth Podcast. Today is episode, I can't remember. Josh, do you remember?
I think it's 9. It's 9. Yeah.
Wow, we're almost to the double digits.
Almost
this is
to
so
the double
impressive.
digits. Yeah.
Wow, we have to have a little celebration at the number 10.
Woo!
So today we're just going to be talking about Josh's message last night. He did week 3, I believe, of the Discipleship series that we're currently working through. And it was a good one. It was a really great one in my opinion.
Thanks.
So we're just going to talk a little more about it today. So
Love
Josh, do you want to kick it off with a bit of a summary?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of neat because I've been summarizing this message to a lot of people lately because at the end of the message, I talk about how kind of applicable it's been in my life lately. But basically, it talks a little bit about how we need to add Jesus to the equation. That's kind of the overall theme to the night was let's add Jesus to the equation. We went back to John 6 where Philip is, the disciples and Jesus are feeding the 5,000. And Philip says like, Jesus, if we want to do this, if we want to feed all these people, just to give them a bite, it's going to cost us, I think it was 200 denarii, which is half a year's wages. And so he does this calculation in his mind. He's looking around. He's like, okay, this is how much we're going to need. And it kind of goes back to this understanding of like, yes, maybe in like human terms, that's the equation, right? And that's the result. But until we add Jesus to the equation, like that's when things change, right? When we're able to add Jesus to the equation. I'm no math person. You probably know more about that than I do. But then we kind of went into what it means to add Jesus to the equation. The first thing is to know the Father means to know Jesus, in order to know the Father, we need to know Jesus. And we go back again to Philip, who's like asking these questions, like how are we supposed to know who God is? And this is in John chapter 14. And Jesus says, you'll know the Father by knowing me. Right. And then the second part of that was we can add Jesus to the equation by asking questions. And again, in John chapter 14, Thomas asked this question like how are we going to know the way? Like, how are we going to know now if you're leaving? Like, how are we going to know the way, Jesus? And Jesus responds to him and says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And it was like this pivotal moment and this pivotal question. And it was like, I talk about how it was like a moment ruiner, they're getting super pumped. They're super excited. And then Thomas asks this question. And then Philip chimes in with his question or with his statement. And so, I think like, again, it kind of, like we need to know who Jesus is by knowing the Father, or knowing the Father to know who Jesus is, and then we need to ask a lot of questions. So there's my probably too long summary.
No, it's great. I really love the points that you made about asking questions, because I feel like, and we may have talked about this a bit actually with when Maddie was on the podcast,
right,
last week or the week before, but about how questions and doubts and things like that tend to get a bad rap because it makes us seem like we don't know enough, or we feel like it's just like a silly question and like everybody else probably knows it, so I don't want to be embarrassed by asking it. But questions are actually so important and probably like arguably, in my opinion, one of the best ways to learn things is to just be like constantly asking if you don't know or if you just want clarification. And the thing is though, you have to then like be seeking for the answer. Don't just ask and then like forget about it, but like constantly seeking those things. So I'm curious to know, because I know I have lots of questions all the time about a lot of things, and I have like certain places or certain people that I'll go to for questions about different things. But I'm curious, in your life, where do you go to, or who do you go to if you have a question in particular about like God or Jesus or your faith in general?
Yeah. So, again, I know we've been talking a little bit about like relationships and things like that, like people we go to, and so I have some people in my life that I'm able to go to. I'm fortunate in that way. I've got Matt Loveday. I'll give him a shout out on the podcast. But I'm about to meet with him. And so, I got to give him a shout out. I think he's bringing me a coffee. Don't tell anybody. I'm super social distanced, of course. We're going to sit out on the back deck. But he's one guy that like I'm able, especially in terms of like ministry related questions, like he's been in it for a long time. He's been in the game for a long time. And And he's kind of had a similar, like he started in youth ministry, so he knows the world of youth ministry, and so I'm able to talk to him about those things. But yeah, in terms of like the way, and obviously that directly also relates to our faith, because we're trying to like create environments at North Park and in our youth ministry and our family ministries that allow people to grow in their faith, right? So I can ask those types of questions. My dad is a real smart guy. He's got a doctorate in theology, and so we have really good discussions about faith. And my mom as well. She has a master's in theology. So my parents are both like pretty smart folk when it comes to like questions about the Bible, and so I can ask them things. And then I've got great peers as well. Like I've got a number of friends that I've grown up with, like somebody like Jordan, the pastor of worship arts at North Park. Like we grew up together asking these questions in our late teens and early 20s. And it's kind of like continued on to this day into our 30s, which is really neat. Not a lot of people kind of have that where they're working and they're peers with the people that they grew up, going to church with and stuff. So yeah, I'd say like, again, peers, some important peers. And then there's a few people that are older than me as well that often have a lot more wisdom than I do in terms of this kind of stuff. And then I really like to read. So I'll go and find books based on the things that I'm thinking about, theological questions that I have. I'll look to, selected, I guess, theologians and people that I really appreciate their perspective on certain things. And so, yeah. And then podcasts a lot of times as well. I mentioned, I think it was on this podcast not long ago, I mentioned how I typically go to podcasts for like humor and just like wanting to kind of put my mind to the side for a bit. But every once in a while, if there are podcasts about like certain theological issues or just things that I'm interested in, I'll seek out individual podcasts and listen to those episodes. I mentioned like online or on last night that I typically go to like Google or Instagram, and I think there is a place for that. Like I think but you have to be really careful who like the voices that you're listening to, and especially on like social media, but at Google as well, like the things that you're searching, because there are so many different perspectives online that I think it's really important to like have trusted people that you're gathering information or listening to online. Sorry, yeah. I talked a long time just there.
No, that's so okay. It's really good. No, I'm really glad you touched on what you said just at the end there about how it's really important to be careful where you're getting your sources or like which sources you're using. Yeah. Because questions are awesome and they're amazing and they're super helpful. But you have to make sure that you are asking questions from like reputable sources. Yes. So like you said, like you look up like theologians that you would listen to, like you would kind of have those probably handpicked, or like you would go and ask other people and be like, is this like a good source that I should use, or who's a source that you think I should use, before you just like look up on Google and you're like, well, who says this about this? Like you have to be careful who you're listening to for those answers. And that's not to like scare people from asking the questions, but just make sure you also have people in your life, so like not only that you can ask questions, but also that you can be like, hey, I'm not necessarily going to ask you this, or you might not know this, but do you know where I can find the answer to this?
And that brings up a good point as well. I think it's really important to like have relationships with people, again, if that's peers or people who like even my mom and dad, when I have like I'll see them and have really great conversations with them. But a lot of times we'll not necessarily have an answer to the question in that moment. And that's sometimes a really good thing. Like number one, it kind of promotes further conversation and more critical thinking, which is really, really important. But it also just like, it kind of like leaves things that maybe they obviously they do, every question has an answer, but there are some things that we kind of like, these moments where it's like, this might be something that I don't ever have a definitive answer to, and that's okay. You know what I mean? Like it's about the process of getting to those questions.
Or sometimes I feel like your answers can change over time, and that's not a bad thing. Like totally, because you kind of like learn as you go. So like you come to an answer at this point, and then a couple years later you come to this answer, and like that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just like the process of absolutely learning and growing. And I love that too, of having like conversations with people and not having to have an answer, because I feel like that's a very common thing that we have to feel like we have to know everything right away.
Yeah.
But I don't think it has to be that way. I mean, some things it's good to keep searching until you find that answer.
Absolutely.
But other times, I've had many discussions with friends where it's we're talking about big topics and we're definitely not gonna hit a resolution right there.
Yeah.
But it keeps that conversation going, and then having those conversations with other people to just, even if you don't come to an answer, just talking about it can help you grow, just as getting an answer can help you grow.
Yeah.
So I think there's importance for both, for sure.
I'm certain there are a lot of questions that we will, within, again, those groups of trusted people, we're going to ask those questions forever. You know what I mean? And that, I think that, again, is something, going back to this message, that is important, right? Because, whether or not we get an answer, it's part of just the way that we're thinking, and we're constantly searching for what God has in store, right? So how can that be a bad thing if we're constantly looking to God for answers? But sometimes, we're going to be in that place of mystery, and it's kind of a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah. I think sometimes it's more important to sit in the question than to come up with a really easy answer,
Totally.
Because the easy answer can be more detrimental than sitting in the question and the doubt for a bit.
Yeah.
So
if a question about such a mysterious and amazing God can be answered so quickly, you have to be a little bit wary, right? And not always. We know that God is love, right? That's an easy answer, but there's so much more to unpack it. It's more than just that little answer, right?
Yeah. Oh, I love this topic. I could talk about this topic for forever. Just asking questions, and there's questions about questions, oh my goodness. But it just goes to show the importance of asking questions or talking about questions with lots of people older than you, people the same age as you, people from different walks of life. It's just important. Communication is so important, I'm such an advocate for it. Anyways, sure. Josh and I could go on for forever, so we're going to cut it off here. But thanks, Josh, for sharing your thoughts and for speaking last night. It was great.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Okay, so don't forget to tune in on Wednesday next week for the last week of our discipleship series. I think David's speaking, if I'm correct, and it's going to be another great one for sure. So make sure you are tuning into that at 7 p.m. And also junior highs, don't forget to come to junior high Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m. on Sunday. It's always a super fun time, so we will hopefully see you there. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye.